Hey everyone, let's wrap up April. April seems like a blur in my mind. I hardly remember anything, but looking at the books I read, I must have had a good time. So let's start with videos. I uploaded weekly check-in vlogs again, and also a goals check-in video for Q1. There were some reading stats and ramblings about how I'm doing with getting out of survival mode. So thank you all for your comments there and for watching, of course. Now let's get into the books. I read a lot and a mix of books again. So let's start with physical books and a short story collection by Terry Pratchett. A Stroke of the Pen is a republishing of stories that were never published under his name before and were rediscovered while looking for one of the stories that actually was attributed to him in the past. And they're mostly from the 70s and 80s, and they're just fun fantasy adjacent stories. They mostly play in the here and now in a small town in England, and strange things happen there. I enjoyed them. I really liked the writing as usual for Terry Pratchett, and I think if you are a Terry Pratchett fan, you will enjoy this. This has nothing to do with the Discworld, so if you're looking to try a short story around the Discworld, I must disappoint you, this is not it. The other two physical books I read, I did not read completely. Let's start with the reread. If You Meet the Buddha on the Road, Kill Him. This is a non-fiction about a psychotherapist talking about therapy as a pilgrimage. So for him, people come and go on a pilgrimage to ease their pain, and the cure is usually within yourself, so you can only get help from the outside, but you cannot have a master, someone who fixes your problems. Badly summed up. I have a full review of this up when I read it the first time, and this time I read the beginning chapters, the first two part, and the third and the fourth part. The middle is a lot of telling stories and showing how through stories we can heal ourselves, and I did not dip into those. I might do over the coming weeks a little bit more, but technically I'm counting it as an April read now. The other physical book I read is a DNF, and I already gave it away. Ridley Walker, I managed to get through 20 pages. This is highly acclaimed as a literary fiction book, and it may be, but I tried reading it, and it turns out that one major part of what makes it so highly acclaimed is that the writing is completely broken and jumbled, and it's really difficult to read. And through that, I could follow what was happening, but I couldn't really grasp what was going on. I didn't understand from the 20 pages I read that it was a post-apocalyptic world, and that our young man was, I even forgot what it wanted to do. I did not enjoy the reading part because it was too much work reading the text, and as a non-native speaker, I couldn't find out some of the words, and it was just the drain and not enjoyment. And yeah, so I decided it's not worth it. I don't have to read it. I can spend my time with better things. Like listening to more of the Stormlight archives. In April, I finished book 2 and 2.5. So The Words of Radiance and Edgedancer. I am still a little confused about the whole complex story. There's a lot going on. I find it very difficult to sum it up into a neat, nice synopsis. I mean, I could just probably read you the synopsis, but you can do that on your own. You don't need me to do that. You want my impression of the things. And what I can say is that book 2 and 2.5 had me more interested in the whole Stormlight archive and more invested in the characters than The Way of Kings. You know, I struggled through that one. Especially Edgedancer, the little 2.5 book, is expanding on an interlude that is part of The Words of Radiance. So we get more and background and expanding story of one of the characters that, as far as I understand, will come more into play later in the story. So that was nice. I really enjoyed that. Jumping back to ebooks, I read Little Gods, and when I just took down my notes, I had to look up what that was. And I gave it 4 stars apparently on Goodreads, and I really enjoyed it, and I read my own review and I was like, oh yeah, that's the book. I remembered a lot of it, but just not the book itself, which has me wonder what it says about my reading in April. Anyways, Little Gods is the story of a woman we actually never meet first person. We're only told about her through other people, and that is what I really enjoyed about the book, that we learn a lot about this main character that is pretty much absent from the whole book, and her world, her life in China and then moving to America, and also the events of urban China, of rural China, and the changes after the events on Tiananmen Square. And I really enjoyed the mixture of the personal story of the people that are telling us the story. Their stories are told as well, and also their interaction with the main character that is absent, and also the world, how it changed in the last 20 years after the massacre and everything that happened. I really enjoyed the writing. It was really, really well done. I also enjoyed that there was a interview with the author afterwards that really gave me some other ideas that I didn't notice before, or what the interviewer thought the book was intending to do and how the author reacted to that. I really enjoyed that. Another ebook I read, I was a little bit more torn about. The Cabinet I really enjoyed partly, but I didn't understand why it was so hyped, because huge parts of the book felt very superficial and not finished or fleshed out enough to merit all the praise I heard about it. The Cabinet starts with a story about someone we actually don't meet later again, but that someone writes stories about the people of their village that have all died in a volcano accident, but these are strange stories, and as the story unfolds or the chapters continue, we learn more and more about what's going on. There is this cabinet where there are patient files and folders about people they call the symptomers, which is the research professor who is leading the study, or whatever you want to call it, is looking at the next step in evolution. The symptomers are showing future human attributes that might be a sign where our species is going. That idea is rather okay-ish. The stories of the symptomers was rather interesting, and it was really, really well done. The writing there was really good. But then there's also the story of the office worker who is taking care of the symptomers and the cabinet and is assisting the professor. And that story is just strange and doesn't go anywhere. The person is not likable. You really don't like him. You don't care about him, and you really don't want to know more about him. And then at some point things get more and more distorted, and you cannot understand the way he acts and reacts and the things he does. And then there's an ending where you're like, what is that going to tell me now? At some point in the book, I thought all these little stories about the symptomers are a way of criticizing how society is, how work life is, how we as humans live nowadays and what it does to us. And these symptomers are trying to find ways of escaping that way of life, are showing the negative sides of that. So, like I said, a criticism on how we live, but it's not taken anywhere. So, in the reviews I read afterwards, most people only talked of the stories about the symptoms being great, but the overall story of the office worker and what happens to him is barely mentioned. So I'm assuming everybody just focused on the short stories or the symptom stories as the great part of the book, and that's where the praise comes from. Because for me, the ideas were not taken far enough or not taken anywhere at the end. Let's go back to an audiobook that really surprised me and I really enjoyed. Blood Over Bright Haven. I picked it up because I've seen so many people enjoying that. It got so much praise and I was curious. It also had the right length of audiobook that I was looking for, so that might have also been a coincidence. Anyways, I started off reading the book or listening to the book and thinking, oh, it has some gender trope struggles, it has some class struggles, and I'm not really interested. It is packed in a nicely fantasy setting. We have a city and a surrounding area. We have the city folk and the surrounding area folk, the country folk, let's call them like that, who are looked down upon, and the city folk are the better, the smarter ones, the civilized society, and the country folk are the primitives. Let's put these words there. The book doesn't really say it like that, but it's clearly intended, and the treatment of the country folk in the city implies that the city folk think they are better than them. And that is a huge part of the story. And I thought, yeah, okay, I've read tons of books about that. I don't really need another one. Then we also have our main character, who is a woman who is breaking into the world of high mages. She starts off, when we meet her, doing the test of becoming a high mage. She's the first woman to ever do that. So I also thought we have to deal with breaking into a male-dominant field and gaining the trust and respect by her peers. And the adversity that I had towards that was mainly when she goes into her new office and her colleagues are making fun of her, giving her an assistant that they think is clearly not qualified because it's a country folk janitor. But as it turns out, that turns into, oh, there could be a romance. And I was like, I don't want to read about this. I've read so many stories about that. I don't care about the packaging. But I kept going because it is captivating. The writing was really drawing you in. I couldn't stop listening. And then things turned chaotic and changed. And the book really addresses how you have to change your opinions and views and how difficult that is. We see our mage questioning everything she had known before, questioning her beliefs, her religion, her upbringing, everything. And it is well portrayed. And I also liked how it deals with all the other underlining things that are happening and going on. I also really liked how the magic is used and described and what it is and what the implications are. So after thinking in the beginning it's going to be a tropey stereotypical story, it changed into a lot more, and I really enjoyed that. So if you were put off by the tropes that you see, go into it. It really is worth it. Unlike the next book I read, I surprisingly got a pre-order that I forgot I made. I don't remember why I made it. It's been a year. I don't know the author, and yeah, so I thought, it's short, let's read it. And I think it's a first in a series, because Goodreads is as number 1 in something. And The Palace Near the Wind is a story where we also have 2 different societies. We have the Windwalkers and the Landwalkers. I hope those were the names. Anyways, the Windwalkers are more in touch with nature and live in the forest, and they are protecting their area and are really described as having skin as bark. And the Landwalkers live in a palace that is expanding into the forest. And we start off by seeing that the Windwalkers make a pact, or rather a sacrifice or a deal with the Landwalkers to stop the expansion for another decade or so. And then we get into the palace, and in the palace things unfold. And there are things that are really, really interesting, but they weren't fleshed out. Our narrator is the woman who is basically sold as a sacrifice to marry the king of the palace, and she is not willing to do that, but she's always looking to find back her sisters who were sold as wives before her and to bring them back home. And she's always making plans, and she is very naive and ignorant, and that is what really takes away the enjoyment of the book. I mostly felt that I didn't get what was going on, but I saw this woman making plans based on no truth, no facts, nothing, but always just deciding, I want this, so I'm going to do this. And she didn't take into consideration what other people wanted. When she finds her sister, she just assumes that they want to go back and want to have a family, and she plans everything around that. But she doesn't take into consideration or even consider that they might not want that. And that is a part which really, the more it happened, because she planned something, it doesn't work, she plans something new, it doesn't work. And these plans get more and more elaborate, and they fail in more elaborate ways. She's making progress in some way, but we as a reader are pretty lost. At least I felt lost as to what does this actually want. And the world building leaves a lot of questions that maybe get cleared up in book 2, but like I said, it was a pre-order, so I got it the day it came out. Who knows when the second novel will come out? And I was left with, okay, mostly good, interesting parts, but too confusing to actually set anyone onto the series, because you might be just as lost as I am. Maybe it gets better when everything is published. We'll see about that if anyone is talking about that, and I might revisit that and read book 2. But honestly, I'm mostly confused. Luckily, the other pre-order that came in April was a major win, which wasn't really a surprise. It was a novella sequel to Nghi's novel The Chosen and the Beautiful, which is a retelling of The Great Gatsby. And if you don't know, I really enjoy The Great Gatsby. So the retelling in itself had flaws for me. I thought she could have diverted more away from the original and dived more into the magic and into the other topics that she added to the book. But in the novella Don't Sleep with the Dead, we're 20 years later. So we find Nick Carraway in his 40s strolling around New York and dealing with life there, feeling a little bit lost, when he finds himself thinking that he heard Gatsby and is trying to find out what happened. So I accidentally spoiled a little bit of The Great Gatsby, expecting everyone who watches my vlogs read the book. Sorry for that if you didn't mute fast enough in my last vlog, but I'm not going to do that again here. So I really enjoyed this novella. I really enjoyed seeing the world of Gatsby again. I really enjoyed spending time with Nick Carraway again. And I also enjoyed what it does in general about storytelling. The whole novella is dedicated to unreliable narrators. Nghi's stories often tell with storytelling and aspects of it, and here we are exploring what an unreliable narrator might be and who it is and what effects it might have, and also looking at questioning ourselves if we are not all unreliable narrators in our own story a little bit to some people. I really enjoyed that. So ending April on a high. Like I said, April was a good reading month. I read a lot of books I liked and made progress in series. I also dived into things that I didn't even know before and made new discoveries. And even the Duds. I'm glad I finally picked up Riddley Walker and got that off my TBR. I'm even totally fine with pre-ordering books that sounded interesting to 2024 Wiebke, but don't appeal to me now. Which only shows that sometimes we need to read our books faster, doesn't it? Because we might lose interest or change. But that's enough about me and what I read in April. Let me know how your April reading was. Have you read any of the books that I've talked about? What you thought about them? Did you like them? Didn't you like them? Do you agree with me? What books made your April? And what did you put down maybe? Let's talk books in comments. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.